You use 7 fundamental questions, which are broken down into just quickly: the kickstart question, the alt question, the focus question, the foundation question, the lazy question, the strategic question, and the learning question. Now, I'd like to jump into a couple. If you could kind of give us the premise of a couple of these questions. I want to look at the focus question, the strategic question, and the learning question, if you've got a bit of time to do that. Starting on the focus question, give us the premise of that.
Yeah, so the focus question is, what's the real challenge here for you? And the premise is, the first challenge that shows up is never the real challenge, and it's rarely the only challenge. We are wired to want to leap into advice giving and solution providing and answer whipping out and all of this sort of stuff, so that when somebody comes and goes, hey, Stephen, here's the thing I'm wrestling with, you're like, oh, you know what? I know how to help fix that, and I want to help you. So you kind of get tempted to go into it. But actually, if you build a reputation in your work or in your life as the person who always figures out the real problem, you just become immensely valuable to those around you. Because in most organizations, big and small, people are working really hard on the stuff that doesn't really matter, because it's the stuff that presented itself first. So this ability just to stay curious a little bit longer, rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly, which is the kind of the definition I use around coaching. Stay curious a little bit longer. You stay curious about what the real challenge is. And it means that when you really figure out what the real challenge is, the answers are going to be actually really helpful. Well, the strategic question says we're always at our best, we're making choices. And strategy is in fact having the courage to make bold choices. So the strategic question says, if I'm going to say yes to this, what must I say no to? You can flip that around. If I'm going to say no to this, what must I say yes to? But most commonly it's, if I'm going to say yes to this, what are the opportunity costs? And what are the things that I have to set up barriers to? And how do I actually commit to this? Because a yes without an understanding of what the no's are, and that's the implication of a yes, is that it must come with no's. Just means that if you don't do that, you're just piling more yeses on, and that doesn't work because everybody's at full capacity.
Tell us about the learning question.
Yeah. So if you lead people, whether you have a big team or a small team, really one of your key jobs is to try and make your people smarter. Because if they get smarter, they become more competent and more confident, and more self-sufficient and more autonomous. And that is not only good for them, it's good for you, and it's good for your organization. So it's really helpful if you can help people learn. But it turns out it's really hard to help people learn. And one of the annoying things is that advice rarely sticks. Advice typically goes in one ear and out the other ear. So when you sit down and go, listen, Stephen, here are my pearls of wisdom and nuggets of gold, this is not going to remember most of that most of the time. People don't even really learn when they're doing it. I mean, they do a little bit, but not so much. The most powerful learning moment is when you actively create a moment for the learning. So that's what this final question, this is number 7 of the 7, is about. And the question is, what was most useful or most valuable here for you? What was most useful or most valuable here for you? And you can basically ask that question at the end of any exchange. I mean, like Stephen can ask this at the end of every podcast. He goes, okay, we've just been talking to this guest. If you had to name what was most useful or most valuable here for you from this conversation, what's the one thing you really want to take away from this podcast conversation? And you can see how that just turns up the heat a little bit from going, oh, that was interesting. Michael burbled on, Stephen burbled on. It was perfectly pleasant to listen to actually saying, name it and wire it. Get those brain synapses firing so that you've got a better chance of remembering it. So you can do that with the people that you lead. You have a team meeting and you go, great, let's just go around and check in. What was most useful or valuable for you from this team meeting? You can do it in a sales conversation. You have a sales conversation and you go, hey, before I go, let me check what was most useful about this conversation for you. And let me tell you what was most useful about it for me. And 3 things happen that can be powerful. One is that other person names and extracts the value that they might otherwise have missed. Because contrary to what we all hope, not everybody notices the wisdom and the amazingness of you on the other side of the table. So you're actually forcing them to name it and see it, and they may have stepped over it otherwise. Secondly, you get feedback as to what's working, because sometimes you're in a conversation, you're like, I was hopeless. That was hopeless. I was hopeless. Nothing good happened here. But if you go, but let me just check, what was most useful and most valuable, if anything, in this call, you'll actually find value that you might otherwise have missed. And then thirdly, and this is the more kind of nuanced, slightly sneaky thing, you are constantly priming your conversations as useful, valuable conversations. So when you sit down with a prospect, for instance, and you go, I love talking to you about your business. I love sharing a little bit about what I do. What was most useful or valuable for you from this conversation? The last thing they will remember is, I've just named this as a useful, valuable conversation. And that just tips you a little closer to getting the end result that you want.